friends, please hear me. The project is complete. Take heed and bear witness to the Gashadokuro.
Alright, enough of that nonsense, sword friends. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sword first. So video is going to lay out in that I will tell you about components and things like that, what makes the sword up, what makes it what it is, what went into making it, that kind of thing. And then I will tell you a little bit about the story behind the sword, or kind of the theme, as it were, in this particular blade, which is a little different for me. Now, I've done some themed blades before, but none that really had any kind of fun story or mythology to tell. And most of the time, as you know, I slap swirly mitsudomes on everything and call it good. So this is definitely a step outside my comfort zone, something different than what I've done before or had done. And if you're interested in hearing about that, I will put it at the end of the video, because I know most folks are just in it for the photos and pretty pictures of swords. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. So let's get into some of the details. You can see that the blade was made by Rick Barrett. It's made out of 1075 steel in a Shobu Zukuri style. Rick also did the habaki and I believe the polish, though I could be off on that. The Tsuba was made by Roman Urban, and there's some other details here that you can pause and read if you'd like. In terms of specifications on size, you can see the blade is about 27 inches long, a little under 12 inches for the grip, and a very shallow sori, yet it's still 2 pounds and 11 ounces. We'll talk about the saya now, one of the crazier looking parts on this sword. You can see what stands out the most is the bone looking paint job on it. Now, the bones are stenciled in and they look like a crossbone of kind of Japanese themed fallen soldier or battlefield bones type thing. The thing to note is that the bones themselves are kind of a polished or gloss white, and the rest of the saya is a black textured ishime. So there's both a visual contrast as well as a textural one when you see the blade, and the bones spiral all the way around the blade, they're not just on the sides. There are also additional bone colored accents on the koiguchi, koijiri, and kurikata. They're made out of a micarta type substance, and in effect they're bone colored, but they're not made of actual bone, which would be too brittle and kind of porous and might not necessarily hold up well to actual use. The micarta is bone colored, but it's actually going to hold up extremely well if the next owner decides they want to use the sword for actual sword related purposes. In terms of the transition between the koiguchi and the fuchi, you can see that there is a size difference, but it's not overly done. The micarta ring is a little bit thicker. That's more or less for durability, and overall it stands out a little bit more as bony. Even though the saya is very fantasy themed, it is not in terms of its application. It's very functional and it holds the habaki properly. Now we'll talk about the suka. You can see just at a glance that it's been professionally wrapped. The diamonds are all very clean and the shape is well done. The minuki are the skull and crossbones in a Japanese theme. I believe they were made by Fred Lohman. That's where I think they come from, though I could be off on that. They have the fallen soldier theme set over a full wrap of black samegawa, and then the ito is wrapped in a suede kind of putty or taupe color. It's tough to describe the color, but it's like a whitish leather bone colored substance. The diamonds again are all very even, very well placed, and it is very, very tight. You can see here that I'm pressing with a little bit of gusto, and it's not moving around. Even over the minuki, it's hard to push to get any kind of motion. The kashra is made out of the same type of micarta substance that I mentioned earlier, and it's made to look like a knuckle bone to further the bone theme on it overall. The Tsuba is a skull Tsuba made by Roman Urban. Now, I acquired this secondhand in a trade of sorts, but it fits on this pretty well and goes with the overall skull and crossbones theme. It's not small or big, it's on just kind of the right size for this blade, and it looks really, really cool. It doesn't feel sharp, nothing bites you in the hand as you move it around, even though it has some edges on it. It all flows really well. The habaki was made by Rick Barrett and has been re-rokushoed patina. That gives it that kind of deep orangish color, which match the seppa that were also custom made for this blade. They have simple rounded edges to match the Tsuba and overall theme. On to the pokey stabby part. You can see that this is a Shobu Zukuri style blade, which means it has an iris leaf kind of tip on it, which is not the kind of standard run-of-the-mill Japanese style Shinogi Zukuri tip, which everyone is familiar with. The blade is in full polish, though admittedly it does have a few scuffs and such. which are hard to photograph, admittedly, as is the hamon. It's really tough to get it to come out. Rick Barrett's hamons are usually pretty bold, but you can see the sun isn't cooperating with me here for whatever reason. It comes out well in some photos and then kind of disappears in others. Frankly, though, the hamon is as expected from Rick Barrett. It's very stunning, it's wild, it has a lot of character, a lot of depth, a lot of things that you can see. And you can also see in some of the stuff here that there are some scratches and some imperfections in the polish. Nothing that wouldn't necessarily be able to be brought out with a new polish if necessary, or even with a different etch. The kissaki was a little bit hard to photograph. It tapers in such a way that I can't get the light on it just right to show that it has a hamon that straightens out near where the boshi would be. As it goes into the kissaki, it kind of straightens out and doesn't have the same kind of wild textures, which I believe, again, is a style of swordsmithing, though I don't know the school or what exactly you would call it. But the hamon, interestingly, kind of straightens out into a suguha style hamon near the end of the kissaki. Another thing I should note, and that I often harp on blades for not having, is that the flats of this one are very smooth. Rick Barrett is very good with a grinder, and you can see the quality of his blades and craft in this here, because it's hard to get a blade perfectly flat and crisp and smooth, and this one has just wonderful lines. It's very clean, flat, smooth, and just, it's beautiful. Alright, so the story behind this sword and why I called it the Gashadokuro is, well, at least if I'm even saying that right. In a nutshell, I had to do a little bit of research on it. What had happened was I fell into a little bit of an odd situation because I made some poor plans, in that I sent the mounter some stuff to get done and I wasn't ready and the fittings weren't the correct thing. So while that was being remedied, I had this Rick Barrett Shobu Zukuri katana, which I wasn't quite sure what to do with, and I had these skull fittings. Now, there's nothing wrong with the shape, geometry, size, or anything like that of the Rick Barrett blade, but what it does is it's not necessarily something that a practitioner would immediately gravitate towards. It's not something that is collected a lot. They're kind of uncommon pieces. Shobu Zukuri is not a super common type of blade. So it gave me the opportunity to think a little bit outside the box, to do something a little bit different, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. Now, the poor planning forced my hand a little bit, and I had these Roman urban skull Suba and just a plain Fuchi, and I thought, well, hell, I'll do this. I have some skull and bones Manuki, and it'll kind of go together. And I was thinking about how they fit together and what to do, and I found the myth of the Gashadokuro. Now, supposedly what the myth is that the unfunererated rites, no funeral rites were performed for the soldiers that fell on the battlefield, and when they died with anger, their bones would amass from angry spirits and form this big giant skeletal structure called the Gashadokuro, which is this angry, super strong, crazy monster that goes around and eats people and tears them apart and all that kind of craziness. And I'm not exactly sure if I'm telling the myth right, but it's popular in the notion of Attack on Titan. If you see any of that kind of anime or manga and you see the giant beasts that are going, and that's very similar to the Gashadokuro, except it's a big skeleton that can be several stories tall. And if you look at the theme of the blade, in a nutshell, we have the Manuki, right? So the Manuki are kind of these, it's a classical shape in that it's a skull and crossbones of a soldier that's fallen on the field of battle, and I have them kind of set on black samegawa, which is kind of like, you know, the forgotten void, as it were. In a nutshell, those are then bound up in ito that looks a bit bone colored. That's what it's supposed to represent. And then it feeds into this kind of larger skeletal structure that I would call the monstrous Gashadokuro, right? And maybe I'm taking some liberties here with either the myth or mythology or the general or the story, since I know very little about it, frankly. I know a little bit about it from the research that I've done, but in honesty, it's not something that I grew up scared of as a child or anything like that, though Attack on Titan is very popular, and if I think about that as a kid, it would be terrifying. Nevertheless, the larger structure, you have bone ito, bone-colored ito, I should say, made of leather, which I think honestly is going to age really well. Like, as you use it, the oils of your hand seep in, it's going to get more bony looking than it is now. And then you have the kashira, which is supposed to be a knuckle bone, but it almost looks a bit like a bony foot in tabe or something like that, which is fitting since it's at the base. And then it feeds up into the large skull structure in the Suba, which is like the head or the massiveness of the Gashadokuro, which if you look at it in comparison to the size of the Manuki is equivalent for giant monstrous beast, at least in comparison. And then the saya, it has obviously bone components on it. The bone spiral around it in terms of the skull and crossbones, you could look at that in a lot of different ways. You could the bones that feed the Gashadokuro kind of going into the mouth, or you could look at it as the bones that house the beast within. There's a lot of different takes that you could go on it. In honesty, I struggled a little bit with how to implement kind of the death and bones theme, and it turns out that I think it fits really well with the kind of this notion of the Gashadokuro, which is pretty cool and kind of terrifying, and the fact that it inspires Attack on Titan is pretty cool, because I have to admit that even as a grown-ass man that doesn't necessarily watch a lot of anime, I find that very amusing. Anyway, that's kind of the notion of the Gashadokuro and how it fits in, and it's the first sword that I've done with this kind of story-ish or more than a theme. As you know, I do a lot of swirly mitsudomes, and I've done a couple other swords that have a little bit of a theme. One had a bamboo theme, one kind of had a wind and storm theme, but nothing quite as mythological as the Gashadokuro. So anyway, I'm glad that it kind of fit together. In retrospect, there would be some things that I would change, knowing that I would shoot for the Gashadokuro theme, and it ended up working out really well that way, but that is what I have for you. I hope you found it relatively interesting. Let me know if you do. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with this sword. I know that I'm going to sell it, but I don't know if it's going to grab anyone. Frankly, I'm not sure that this theme has been done before. It's not so far out of the line of history that it wouldn't be plausible that it might have been made in time, that some Japanese sword would have been made with like a death style theme, but it's definitely not a historic sword. In fact, I would call it more of a fantasy-esque kind of sword without jumping too far off the deep end. Now, I could see it as a nice wall decoration for somebody. I don't think it'd be out of place if somebody put it in their obi and used it at the sword school or for cutting or something. It's certainly more than functional and would work well for cutting things. And at the same time, I don't think it would look out of place if somebody wore it with a fantasy outfit at a Renfest. I mean, the trick is that the sword is not so far in the fantasy realm that it's unpractical or unusable, and it's certainly very functional. It's made with all functional pieces, and it's made to be used as a sword. But it definitely is not like a piece from history. So anyway, let me know what you think. There's comments below. Let me know what you think of the sword. Let me know if you think I should do another project like this in the future with a different theme. Let me know if you have an idea for a theme. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers. Alright, so the Gashi, what the hell, how do you say it again? Gashadokuro.